Hey, thanks for joining me today. Today we are going to study the kingdom of the Antichrist. Yes, the empire of the Antichrist is known as the beast. Also, the individual is known as the beast. And if you've ever wondered what happens when he takes control of the world, if you are around, if your children are around, this is the study that explains it all. Now, we will be analyzing Daniel 7 and then comparing it to Revelation 13. This is episode 18 of our studies in end time Bible fulfillments in sequential order. We know the last 7 years is referred to as the tribulation period. However, the tribulation period effectively has two parts. The first part lasts for 3.5 years, and in this slide, I'm calling that the formulation period, mainly because the Antichrist does not have full dominance, but is the period where his empire is formulating, and by the time we get to the end of the first 3.5 years, he will become the dominant. Now, because he will become the dominant, that is a beast that is represented in Revelation 13. And what that does is it explains the picture of what that kingdom will look like in the last days, the last 3.5 years, just before Jesus Christ returns. Now, very important, what I've done is I've taken some words out of Daniel chapter 7, verses 3 through 6, and I wanted to do that because these words will come up once again in Revelation 13. They are important words to understand if we are going to get a complete picture of the beast in the second half of the tribulation period. Now, it mentions in verse 3 that there are four great beasts that are coming up from the sea, and they are different from one another. Now, understand, in verse 2 of Daniel 7, it talked about the four winds of heaven blowing on the sea. Everything starts with heaven being able to move things in the direction that God wants it to move. So why is it blowing on the sea? Does that mean that there's going to be physical animals that are going to come out of the sea? No, that is not what it's telling us here. It is talking that the winds are moving the spirit realm on earth, which is mainly controlled by the fallen world, the fallen angels of Satan's kingdom, and he is moving them to make their empires that they control, their territorial angels, making those angels move the kingdoms on earth to perform certain things. Now, we will notice that in verse 4, the first kingdom of three that are mentioned here is a lion with the wings of an eagle. Second kingdom resembles a bear, and the fourth kingdom is a leopard with four heads and four wings. Now, this is important to understand because I mentioned the wings here just to point out that these things will not exist on any parts of the Revelation 13 beast, the Antichrist beast, where he is full dominance. However, within that beast, there is mention of a part of a lion. There are mentioned part of a bear, and the leopard, which will make up the biggest part of all these other kingdoms. The leopard that is also mentioned in Revelation 13. All right, let's take a look at the fourth beast. And this is during the first 1260 days. The Antichrist does not yet have control, but this is the period that he will gain his control. So let's look at some verses in Daniel 7, verses 7 and 8. And this is what it says. And after this, I kept looking in the night visions. So we see that Daniel got these beasts from several visions and not just one. And behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with his feet. Okay, let's stop there and understand. You could see who becomes the dominant. So this is setting up the period where he is gaining his strength and ultimately will come to complete authority. And again, he does it by the power of Satan. It says it was different from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Now remember the 10 horns because these are going to come up again in Revelation 13. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up amongst them. And three of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like a man and a mouth uttering great woe. So you could see the ruler of this beast is very prideful. And what it's talking about here is the fact that he will replace three of the horns. Now, keep in mind, in Revelation 13, we will see 10 horns there again. But in this image, what Daniel is talking about, that he will remove three other leaders. So he comes up out of one kingdom, he is one, and then he removes that leader from that kingdom, and then he will remove the other two kingdoms, which are Syria and Egypt. The Antichrist will come from Iraq, most likely. And so now he will be in total control of those regions. After 3.5 years, we are at the point of transition. We are now entering a time of where the Antichrist becomes dominant. And it is key that we understand these times. Now, in Revelation 12, I'm going to look at 3 verses with you, and it's going to help us get a little bit of understanding of what is going on. In verse 6, it said, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so there she might be nourished for 1,260 days. Now, this is key. We understand that the abomination of desolation had happened. And because two witnesses came forth and told the women about things that were recorded in the Bible, as they did miracles to validate that they were sent by God, many of these people fled to the wilderness on their word to be protected by God. This was the first act of faith that many of Israel would do in order to be delivered by their Messiah. Now, it says in verse 13 of chapter 12, when the dragon saw he was thrown down to earth. Stop there, because if you look at 13:1, it'll confirm the same thing. The dragon no longer is operating as the prince of the power of the air. He is now operating on earth, and he is a go-between between the spirit realm and the physical realm. Now, he understands he's got a short time. And so what does he do? Well, it says here in verse 13, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Now, that is a reference to Israel. He persecuted those of Israel at that time that are alive because it was that nation that gave birth to the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the one who delivers us from our sins. So he's got two things that he needs to do to discredit God before other spirit entities throughout the universe. I'm talking good and bad angels. He needs to be able to get Israel to reject the person of their creator and come over to his side, or he must entirely kill them off so God cannot fulfill his promises to the nation. Now, you will notice in verse 14, it says that there are two wings of a great eagle that are given to the woman. And this is in order that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, that she was to be nourished for 8 times, and half a time from the presence of who? from the presence of the serpent. He is operating in the physical realm. These are not aliens, these are spirit entities that operate now in physical form and will be visible in many cases to humans. Now, you notice that it was given for the woman to have two wings of a great eagle. Very important. This is saying that God will enable her to escape quickly to the wilderness place that He has prepared. So He is working on behalf of the woman here. He's working on behalf of the remnant of Israel. And there He will feed them and protect them for 3.5 years. Escaping from the serpent is an important part of the link between Daniel 7 and Revelation 13. It was necessary for the Antichrist to establish control over the earth to be able to accomplish the mission that Satan had planned for him. Little does he know it's about to fail. Now, taking Revelation 13, we're going to try and explore some of the links between Daniel 7 and chapter 13 of Revelation. I've taken the first two verses here and I've highlighted in the blue and red words that literally were used in Daniel 7. You will find in the book of Revelation there are more Old Testament references to the Old Testament than any other book of the New Testament. Now, here in the black highlighted, you will see something we just looked at in Revelation verse 12, and that is Satan wants to get the woman, and this is why he does what he does. Now, in verses 1 and 2, it says, I saw a great serpent coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So, who is over here backing the Antichrist in the world? It is the dragon or the serpent. Now, if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, let me invite you to do so you can catch more of these videos on end time Bible fulfillments. At the same time, feel free to share this video with someone you think might be interested, or please give us a thumbs up because it really does help the channel. We're going to do a comparison analysis between Revelation 13 and Daniel 7. Now, I listed most of the first two verses of 13 on the left solely for reference, so if you need to look at it, they are there. But I'm going to go ahead and take my bits and pieces out of what we learned in Daniel 7 and post them on the right. The first thing we will notice is there were 4 beasts that came out of the sea in Daniel, but now we only have one. This is important because it shows that there is only one world empire left at this time, and many of the elements of the other kingdom have been absorbed into this kingdom. Now, in verses 4 through 6 in Daniel 11, we saw that there was a lion, a bear, and a leopard represented. But here in Revelation, we see that there is only the lion's mouth, there is only the bear's feet, and the leopard's bodies, no foreheads and no wings. This is to show that they are in subjugation or in subjection to the rule of the leaders and the kingdom of the Antichrist. The Antichrist's empire now is dominant. Furthermore, you'll notice the lion's mouth to give it the idea that it will still speak like a warrior. Secondly, it shows the feet of the bear, no wings. It shows again that its movement has been slowed down. And then it shows the body of the leopard, and that is to represent the kings of the east, which will be the largest component of the other 3 kingdoms under the control of the Antichrist. Now, understand during the first 6 trumpets, 60% approximately of the Earth's population was destroyed. This leaves only about 40% at this particular time. So the population has been severely reduced, and much of it now, if not close to all of it, is under the control of the Antichrist. Furthermore, when we compared Daniel 7, we saw that there were 10 horns on that beast as there are on this beast. But something interesting has changed. We remember that the Antichrist came up out of the roots, moving one beast out of place and then removing two others. So, why again now are there 10 horns appearing if they were removed? Very simply put, this is to show that though the Antichrist became the dominant in replacing three other kings, he at this particular time will select a king for Iraq, a king for Syria, and a king for Egypt to be underneath him, and he will be in total control. By the way, we will see at this point he is now the king of Israel. Well, how do we know that? Well, let's look at Daniel 7, verses 11 through 12. And it says, Then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Now it becomes very important to understand the focus here was he was listening, Daniel was the one listening here to the boastful words of the ruler that was speaking. And then he sees all of a sudden the beast is slain. Yes, it is coming to its end. So the entirety of the beast kingdom gets slain according to Daniel, is destroyed, and it will enter into the eternal fire. Lastly, we must take into consideration of things of importance is that we have an inclusio in Daniel 7, because in verse 2 we had the words beast. Now in verse 12 it talks about the rest of the beasts, plural. The word beast here becomes an inclusio, holding the context of the chapter together. And what this is basically showing us at this particular time, though much of these other kingdoms were incorporated under the control of Antichrist, those who took the mark, those who opposed and tried to destroy Israel, they're included in verse 11. But there were other peoples from these other three kingdoms, the lion, the bear, and the leopard, that did not participate. And as a result, these people will serve under Messiah's dominion. They will be under his control, and they will continue on until the appointed time, which is the end of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. Sometime after the midpoint of the tribulation period, the Antichrist is going to receive a fatal head wound that will cause his death, but there will be a healing, a miraculous healing that will deceive people that will follow. Now, we know this is a second half event. We don't know quite when, because it is mentioned with the beast of Revelation 13 in verses 3 and 4. The death is obviously temporary, but let's look what it says in those verses. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast, and they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war against him. So what we see here is there is a fatal wound in the head, and he will be healed by it. Like the serpent, he will bruise your head and you will strike his heel in Genesis 3:15. Well, here God strikes the Antichrist. It's not God, but God allows someone to kill the Antichrist. Now, this causes both the dragon and the beast to be worshipped, but they are now willing to follow the leadership of the Antichrist because they see him as being in ultimately powerful because of the dragon's backing. Now, this does have some interesting things about it because even though he is healed, there are permanent disabilities. And we find that in Zechariah chapter 11. Now, let's do it verse by verse here. Verse 15 says, "And the Lord said to me, take up again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd." Now, again, Zechariah here is doing something that's common with Israel, and that's for the prophet to make himself to be a type by taking up stuff that just does not work with shepherding sheep. And then it says in verse 16, "For behold, I'm going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or sustain the one standing, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep." Remember, sheep is a follower, "and tear off their hoofs." So, in instances, rather than this particular leader standing up to help those who are weak in his country, ultimately he goes against them, and specifically he will target and devour the flesh of fat sheep, those who really have the relationship with God and have been provided for by him. Now, furthermore, it tells us something interesting as well. This tells us he's a leader of Israel. Remember, there is total of 10 horns. He replaces 3. So what he does here is he puts in 2 sub-rulers of Iraq, Egypt, and Syria, right? But this implies that there's also the possibility that he himself at this particular point becomes ruler of Israel. Well, why would Israel accept that? Why would the people that are Jewish say, okay, we'll take him in if he's a Gentile? Well, let's look at verse 17. "Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock." This carries the implication that he is a member. He contains in his body Jewish DNA in some form. But he has left the flock because he is not standing with the flock, as we saw in the verse before that. And this is what God says is going to be the outcome of the healing that we read about in Revelation 13. It says, "A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind." So when this healing takes place of this particular leader, it is a fake healing because he is not completely healed. When Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, he was completely healed. Yes, he had the wounds and the marks in his hands, but he was able to function properly. The Antichrist is armed. One of them will be totally withered because he was struck there, and also his right eye will cease to give him sight. So that will make this a fake miracle, but foolish people will still follow. Let's talk about the power that the Antichrist is going to have for 42 months. Now, we're going to get more into detail on this as we progress in our playlist and cover the events as they are happening in sequence in chronological order. But this will just help give us an overview or a preview of what is up and coming. Now, in Revelation, starting in the chapter 13 with verse 5, let's kind of just work our way through this. And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. The authority to act for 42 months was given to him. So this is all given to the Antichrist. He's going to speak out against God. He's going to have the authority to do so. Now, what does he speak against God? What are in his arrogant words? Well, in verse 6 it says, he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and that is those who dwell in heaven. Now, there's a distinct separation over here because he is not talking about the tabernacle on earth, but these blasphemies are geared toward the Creator, his tabernacle, his holy place in heaven, and it is attacking those who dwell in heaven. Now, in verse 7, it was given him, again, it's given to the Antichrist. Don't get thrown off with the word given over here. God is just simply allowing him to do these things that he wants to do. So it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Now, you must notice there is a distinction. There are those that he's going to rule over and those that are going to resist him. It is the saints that are going to resist him. Now, this would include both Jewish people and the church. Those are the people of God that will begin to resist him. And God is going to say that this is a good thing, and you will see that because it tells us something more about it in the next verse. First of all, he is making a separation between those who God does not want, those who do not belong to him, those the Antichrist has authority over, and those who are willing to fight for the relationship with God. Now, in verse 8, it says, all who dwell on the earth will worship him, with one caveat: everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world of the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. So if your name is in the book of life, you will be one of these saints that will be resisting him. But what becomes important about this book of life is that it shows that God knew exactly who the faithful were, and their names were there at the beginning when the foundation of the earth was laid. Now, furthermore, we notice in Psalm 69:29, I'm sorry, 28, as we see in other verses of the Old Testament, that there is a book of life that has names blotted out. Could it be the same book? Well, I don't know. However, scholars tend, in some cases, to believe that there are two books: one with your name recorded that can't be changed, and one that names get blotted out, but over the period of history, only the names of those who were recorded from the foundation of the earth will be alive to enter into the kingdom of God. So are they two books that match, or is it just one book that's being talked about where other names were blotted out? I don't know. Verse 9, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Now, verse 10 is very important because God is talking to the saints here. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. That's what he's saying. If you don't resist the Antichrist and you're willing to go ahead and be captured by him, well, I'm going to allow that to happen. That doesn't mean you're not his. But he says, if anybody kills with the sword he must be killed. Now, that is telling us there are those that will put up a resistance or a fight, and many of those will die, but that's a good thing because in either case, it tells us here is the perseverance and the faith of the saint. So if you do either one of these two things, you are persevering and you have faith. If you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. If you haven't yet given us a thumbs up, please also consider doing so. Our next study will be on the burial of Gog's army, why it starts in the midpoint or after the midpoint of the tribulation, and where it is at, and why it goes on for 7 years. My name is Vince. Thanks again, and may God bless you.